he has had to say tonight right here on GB News. First, though, we'll head back to State of the Nation.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome to State of the Nation. Well, we are witnessing a shift in the geopolitical system not seen since the end of the Second World War. The United States of America is no longer the guarantor of European security. And this is a lesson we should have learned a long time ago. The United States pursues its own interests. For a while, our interests coincided. During the Cold War, they overlapped. During the First and Second World Wars, they eventually overlapped too. But then this happened.
Not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. But right now, you don't. Yeah, you're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country, that's back to you, far more than a lot of people said they should have.
This could be the defining moment in 21st century politics, but it reminds us of one thing of which our political leaders have been in denial for too long. Special relationship is a one-way street. The Americans don't really believe in the special relationship. They talk about it, they pamper us, they pat us on the head, they tickle our tummy, but it's been a strategic tool for them to rally our support. It operates in their direction and in their favour. The events of last week are a reminder the Americans are not always our friends, but we need them as allies. The two, as Lady Grantham notably pointed out, are not the same. And although President Trump may be a strong Anglophile, he may have loved the late Queen, and this must be capitalised while it lasts, in case we have another sentimental Biden-esque pseudo-Irishman in the presidency. But ultimately, he will do what is best for America. Alliances are not the priority. He wants to make America great again, not help make the United Kingdom great again. The great Lord Palmerston embodied this point when he said in 1848, "Therefore I say that it is a narrow policy to suppose that this country or that is to be marked out as the eternal ally or the perpetual enemy of England. We have no eternal allies and we have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and those interests it is our duty to follow." The good news is that this has sufficiently disrupted the consensus to force European powers to get serious. Sir Keir Starmer was right to increase defence spending, but we must go much further. The age of European over-reliance on the United States, in which we opt for the cosy life of the welfare state over economic growth and codependency over self-sufficiency, is over. It's time for the UK to follow the lead of Donald Trump and follow our eternal and perpetual interests. As ever, let me know your views via mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm particularly pleased to be joined by one of England's most distinguished commentators, the chairman of The Spectator, Charles the Lord Moore of Etchingham. Charles, thank you very much for coming in. This is really important, isn't it? Because America always puts American interests first. And we sometimes have this romantic view that the White House will put British interests first. We're now remembering that it won't.
It does always put American interests first, but what has often happened is that our interests coincide. And that, I think, has produced actually real friendship as well as what people call transactional relationships. And the height of that in modern times was the Reagan-Thatcher relationship. The whole time he was president, she was British Prime Minister. A unique concatenation like that's never happened before or since. And they had a common purpose in everything about the Cold War, and in many other things too. And that was real, both as a friendship and as an alliance of interest. And that's ideally what you do want. But and even now so, it's different because partly the cumulative fault of the West, of Western Europe, including Britain, but also Trump has got a different attitude. So he doesn't seem to see that the 1945 settlement, if you want to call it that, should be normative or should continue. He's not actually throwing out NATO, but he's striking out against all this. And I think as his thing with Zelensky showed extremely unpleasant and irresponsible. And what's so shocking about it is not that he's necessarily disagreeing with European partners, but that he is traducing a free country which is being invaded by a tyrant. And the peace of Europe depends on, and indeed of the world, depends on tyrants not being able to invade free countries.
Well, this seems to me to be the fundamental point, that the nation-state system breaks down if other nation-states can be invaded and there are no consequences, and that it is overwhelmingly in the interests of America, as well as everybody else, to try and stop this sort of thing happening. And that's what's so particularly unusual about America's response this time in the post-45 world, but not really in the pre-45 world, when America didn't really bother about what happened.
You're right, it didn't. But in the pre-45 world, America wasn't telling all these countries what to do. There's a tremendous paradox here in which Trump is saying, we're out of this, and he's saying, I'm the boss, you've got to do my deal. And it seems to me it's slightly got to be one or the other. And it's very irresponsible, and I think he's going out of his way to show there is no criticism of Putin. There is no suggestion that what Russia has done is wrong. There's quite a lot of suggestion that what Ukraine has done is wrong. He never actually says, yes, Putin invaded Ukraine and he shouldn't have. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And he accused Zelensky of wanting to start World War III, but it's Ukraine that got invaded by a nuclear power.
Indeed,
and so there's a tremendous difficulty for everyone in the West. We remain allied with the United States. It's very important. We have to look beyond the moment of Trump to think of the long-term interests. But could it be that they really are diverging? And if so, have we got the money and the gumption and the strategy and the sufficient alliance to do what we should be doing?
Well, there are two thoughts that come from that. One is, Starmer is clearly right, isn't he, to try and keep in with the American president as far as possible, in exactly the same way as Churchill tried to keep in with F.D. Roosevelt, that it is fundamental to get any good out of America that the British Prime Minister and the US President get on, and that it may appear somewhat sycophantic at times, but Churchill was happy to really lard Roosevelt with praise. And then the second thought is exactly the one you were mentioning. What can we actually do? Can we rebuild our military in a way that there is some serious response if Russia decides to go any further?
I think we could rebuild our military, and we should. And by the way, it would have economic benefits as well as high costs, because you would have a strong defence industry across Europe. What I think is more difficult, and in this respect, though I understand why he's doing it, I think what Keir Starmer's saying about boots on the ground is quite dangerous unless he really knows he can do it. Because what he's saying, he's going to put them in to back up a deal. But what will the deal be? And would we actually be acting responsibly if we put British troops into Ukraine to secure a peace which was very unequal and unfair, and which Putin would kick over at any moment? Because then you really could be in a horrible situation for the world, but also specifically for British troops. And so that's another reason why there needs to be some understanding with America, and I think you're right, that Starmer's tactics are basically correct, that he wants to make clear that his position is different from the United States without having a row. And he's trying to sort of get the best out of the Trump situation. That's the right way to go, but let's think that that's yet been achieved.
And how much do we learn from history? It seems to me in some senses it's absolutely classic British policy making that we run down our army in peace.
Yeah.
We suddenly discover that it's a dangerous world. And when we start rearming, we are always, always late. And that we have to ask ourselves whether this time we've got time. We can get the money if we want it. Our defence expenditure is tiny at the moment in long-running historic comparisons. We're spending an awful lot on things quite wastefully. It's not difficult to find the money, but do we have the expertise, the manufacturing capacity to make the armaments and to train the soldiers in a reasonable amount of time?
We don't have that capacity. in the short term. However, I think if we were determined to do it, we can move. You can always move much faster than you think if you have a war-type mentality, and also we wouldn't be doing it alone, and also we would be. It's a signal. What Putin's always think about is which way are things going, not exactly what is it like at this moment. And as long as Putin realizes that the high cost to attacking early, as well as attacking later, I think it's a reasonable thing to aim for. I don't think we should be despairing. The collective economic and military might of Western Europe is greater than that of Putin, with one very important exception, which is that he has overwhelming nuclear superiority, and we have small amounts of nuclear weapons, only France and Britain. And what the most terrifying way to put it is that what you may be getting here is the two by far biggest nuclear powers in the world, Russia and the United States, objectively more on the same side against Europe. I'm exaggerating, if you see what I mean. I don't think this is quite what's going to happen, but I do think it's very dangerous because Trump is lauding and excusing a very, very seriously dangerous and bad man and bad power, and attacking and denigrating the victim.
And if Ukraine had kept its nuclear weapons, Putin wouldn't have invaded, would he?
Yeah. Mind you, they couldn't have because no deal would ever have been done with Russia
if they'd been kept them. Yeah. Thank you very much, Charles. After the messages from our sponsors, we'll be continuing our coverage of the latest information on this transformation of the international order in real time and speaking to someone live from Kyiv.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we're going to introduce you to a friend of mine, friend of the programme now, and that is Katie Nicholl. Katie is the role correspondent at Vanity Fair, and she has got a tale to tell. And this tale began, well, here we are on Valentine's Day, Katie, and this was 2 years ago, and this was a horror story we're talking about.
Yeah, it was a bit of a horror story. It wasn't the Valentine's I'd wanted or expected. I got a call from the Royal Free. I'd been in for an MRI earlier on in the January, and for my liver, and I got a call saying that I had cholangiocarcinoma, which I had no idea what it was.
I have no idea what it is.
I know. Well, Dora, who is my surgeon,
this is your surgeon. It's a very important lady, and this is Dr. Dora. And you really did do the explorer bit. You had to go in there and cut out this cancer.
Yeah, correct.
But tell us what sort of cancer this is.
So this is a primary liver cancer that arises from the bile duct of the liver. So it's not a metastatic coming from elsewhere, it's a primary. It doesn't arise from the hepatocyte itself. I mean, imagine that the liver is like a red thing, and inside it growing something like a green tree with a lot of branches. So within those branches, we have the epithelial cells, the bile duct cells, and this is where this cancer comes from.
I felt that I was possibly perimenopausal. I was getting these heart palpitations. I was getting really, really bad sense of indigestion, but nothing that was making me overly concerned. But I was with a girlfriend, and she just said, "Are you all right?" And I burst into tears. I said, I just don't feel myself. And she said, "Just go see your GP." And I did.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we were talking, not surprisingly, about Donald Trump, and the mail mogs have come in. Neil says all that happened over the weekend was a talking shop of so-called European leaders pressing the flesh and eating dinner. No cash, no troops, no commitments. That is the reality. And Mick says there is a world of difference between voicing support for Ukraine and challenging Russia to fight a war. There is a danger that Starmer will overplay his hand to stay in the limelight. I'm not confident that he will continue to deal with the current situation. Well, joining me now to continue our coverage of today's developments is Ukraine human rights lawyer Alexandra Matvichuk, live from Kyiv. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining me. What is the feeling in Kyiv in response to what President Trump has said and the views of your president about President Zelensky, who is so hugely admired in the United Kingdom?
People in Ukraine know that Putin started this large-scale war not because he wanted to occupy just more part of Ukrainian land. Putin started this large-scale war to occupy the entire Ukraine. And to go further, he thinks about forcible restoration of Russian Empire. He dreams about his legacy. So people in Ukraine want the world leader to discuss not natural minerals, but security guarantees, how to make for Putin impossible to achieve this goal, not just to postpone it in time for several months or for several years.
But if you're expecting the Americans to pay to support Ukraine, doesn't he who pays the piper call the tune, and that President Trump is the piper at the moment, and therefore President Zelensky has to dance to his tune even if he doesn't like it?
President Trump started these peace negotiations because he told he cares about people dying in this war. So this was his words, which means that if President Trump cares about people dying in the war, he also has to care about people dying in Russian prisons. Thousands and thousands illegally detained civilians, men and women, subjected to horrible torture, sexual violence, and ill-treatment daily. And I'm, as a human rights lawyer and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, I'm shocked how less we speak about human dimension in all this peace negotiation, because we must return discussion about people into the negotiation table. What will be with 20,000 of Ukrainian children illegally deported to Russia, separated with their families, supposed to be adopted by Russian families? What will be with people in occupation in general? Russian occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means enforced disappearances, torture, rapes, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. This is what we have talking about.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much for explaining that, the true horror of what you're seeing in your country. And I think we all wish you well from, dare I say, the safety of England. Thank you very much. With me now is my panel, the Telegraph columnist, Tim Stanley, and the former Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Tim, what can the UK do if President Trump doesn't want to protect Ukraine? Can we do anything?
No.
What should we do?
So what should we do? America and American power is the reality of the West and its defence. There may be a point in the future at which, because of this, ironically, this might be a fruit of what Trump's done, the West raises the money and invests in the defence such that it can club together and defend its borders itself. But until we reach that point, which would take us quite some years to get to, by the way, we are reliant upon American large S. So as much as the summit at the weekend is noble in intent, and I agree with those who regard Ukraine as having the moral cause, it does. Ultimately, everything depends upon the goodwill of the United States.
If we go back, not to the 1930s, because comparisons with the 1930s are always difficult, but to 1914,
yes,
we sent, what, 20,000 troops to France to help the French, the contemptible little army, the old contemptibles as they became known, as they were dismissed by the Kaiser. we were able to do very little to start with. We built up a military machine over 4 years. Isn't this British history just repeating itself? We're not ready to start with, but there comes a point at which Putin cannot be allowed to go further. And if he wins in Ukraine and America withdraws, then he's a threat to Poland, he's a threat to Estonia, he's a threat to Latvia and Lithuania. What happens next?
This is the comparison that I find very worrying, and it's what is at the back of my head when Starmer says putting troops on the ground and British planes in the air. Whenever we discuss the threat of a foreign power, we always go to 1939 and say that's an example of what happens when you don't act quickly enough. There's a counterexample of 1914, in which a country is too quick to respond, and as a result finds itself stuck in a 4-year meat grinder war, which, by the way, destroyed our empire. One reason why the world is a unipolar world with America at the centre of it is because America made the condition of support for Britain in the Second World War dependent upon deconstruction of the empire. America is in charge because America wanted to be in charge.
Well, in both world wars, America made a lot of money out of us. And isn't this the real point? We must never allow ourselves to think that America is there to succour us. It will behave in the interest of the United States.
Well, this is why, of course, Donald Trump is now talking about mineral deals in Ukraine, because again he is looking to see what America can get out of it. People don't invest in their military in the way that America has just for kind of giggles. They do it for a real strategic and economic purpose, and the military-industrial complex in the US is a well-known phenomenon and is part of how the US economy works. I think if we go back to the 1914 example, is that war, most people in reflection would say was totally needless, was totally killed families in Britain, working-class families.
I think most people, it's an overstatement. There's a debate about whether the First World War was
After
worth
the First
fighting.
World War, there was a broad consensus around Europe that
I think that's overstating it. I think there is a debate about whether it was.
That it led particularly working class men and boys, but whole villages and communities in many areas, to their deaths for very little gain for this country, based all on the honour of having to uphold certain treaties. And the problem is, with the Ukraine example, is, yes, we have a duty to act because it's based on a treaty. We signed a treaty with America and Russia that we would secure Ukraine's borders if either of any of the others ever invaded, and we would go and bat for them.
Yes,
the problem is, it is very like the ententes of the
world. We
can't
can't defend it on our own.
We're stuck in this situation.
But you're
now.
basically saying, let Putin take 20% of Ukraine, or the whole of it if he wants, because there's nothing we can do. And if Trump isn't prepared to do anything, that's just tough.
Well, I think there are things that we can do, but without getting the US on board, they are not military and they are probably not decisive.
But there's nothing ultimately that we can do that isn't military. We've tried all the sanctions and all of that.
Correct. And by the way, Ukraine surviving the war is surely a win. If we're working on the assumption, which we just heard from that person in Kyiv, if we're working on the assumption that Putin's goal was to completely conquer Ukraine as part of a first step towards reconstruction of the Soviet Union, if that is true, then Ukraine's survival, with US investment acting as a backstop and with Europe invested in its security, is a win. Take it.
Well, if Europe really is investing in its security, if Russia's taken it. Anyway, thank you to my panel. As a new report reveals the devastating effects of net zero on farming and freedom, I will shortly be talking about how this country could be facing a meat and dairy tax if we want to reach net zero by 2050. I don't.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations Forecast.
There's some wet and windy weather on the way for Iberia over the next couple of days, but higher pressure further east is bringing some sunshine. However, there is still some showers around, particularly across parts of Greece, Cyprus and Turkey. High pressure, though, brings sunshine to parts of Italy and southern France. However, low pressure very much in charge further west, with plenty of rain and strong winds, and those temperatures generally in the mid to high teens for much of Tenerife and the Canary Islands. There is some sunshine on the way and temperatures are on the rise by the time we get to Friday.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GBNews Travel Destinations Forecast.
I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christys Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions. But every Friday night at 9 p.m, you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christys Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there. I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. A leading British investment bank has issued a new report illustrating the correlation between economic stagnation and increased energy prices. We've been talking about this on this programme for months, claiming our net zero drive has made us poorer. Cold and poor is the catchphrase. But last week, the Climate Change Committee issued its 7th carbon budget, which celebrated industrial decline and called for a 27% reduction in the number of cattle and sheep by 2040. That's 11 million animals they want culled, in what would be a devastating move for the already struggling British farmer. The report effectively calls for a meat and dairy tax, but it's too cowardly to say so explicitly. It references favourably another report in the footnotes that explains that the only way to cut meat and dairy consumption is by a 20% tax. So it's time to scrap the Climate Change Committee and at least lose their hot air. Well, I'm joined now by my panel, my most intellectual panel, the Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley and the former Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle. It's quite underhand, isn't it, of this committee to say we need to reduce meat and dairy, and this is going to be very difficult, and then they have a footnote that refers you to a report that says the only way to do this is 20% tax. They don't dare say it in the body of the report, but that's actually what they want.
Well, I think both the reports that you have mentioned are actually probably flawed. The first report that you mentioned is actually about correlation, and there's no evidence of causality of investing in green technologies and increasing prices. They have shown a period of correlation, but nothing beyond that in the report. Very, very weak evidence. And the second report...
I'd argue about that. We'll come back to that.
The second report that you mentioned here, I think also misunderstands how the elasticity of demand for for meat products, and they think that by increasing tax you will change behaviours. I think, in fact, what you'll do is increase resentment. And so I don't think that's the way to change behaviours. I think what you do is you actually make other things cheaper and easier to live with. People do probably eat too much beef in this country. We should be focusing more on celebrating Welsh lamb and on those other fantastic local meats that we can produce.
There is a very strong correlation with societies becoming richer and eating more beef, because it is the most extravagant form of meat. So, if I remember rightly, you need 2 pounds of corn to get 1 pound of chicken, 3 pounds to get 1 pound of pork, and 8 or 9 pounds to get 1 pound of beef. It's much.
This is Somerset coming through, isn't it?
This is just how farming works. And that beef is a luxury, and that's why the climate change fanatics...
It is not a luxury at the moment for most people's palate, and actually what we should be doing is encouraging lamb or pork, which can be consumed actually
I prefer beef.
Much better.
It's nicer. I mean, I like lamb, but I'm not very keen on pork.
Well, I think we should take Ed Miliband off. Let's take Ed Miliband off net zero and just send him around the country promoting fish fingers. Let's do something useful. Let's do something useful with him. Don't you think there's an extraordinary discord between... We've just been discussing the very real and immediate threat of war, even a nuclear exchange, and then we have to switch to discussing this drive, this ongoing ideological drive towards being net zero.
This is really important.
Even though the technology and military requires a great deal of energy.
But they've been talking about having electric armoured personnel carriers and stuff like that. Well, what are they going to do when they're going over the flatlands?
When Keir Starmer gave his statement this afternoon, one lone Labour MP, God bless him, asked what Britain was doing to promote renewable energy in Ukraine. And it shows what some people's priorities are in the midst of this conflict.
Ukraine was a leader in nuclear and green energies, and Russian invasion has helped destroy some of that leading technology.
And indeed, and there's a nuclear power plant that has been in the war zone during the course of these troubles.
Chernobyl.
No, not Chernobyl.
Because that's not the best
it's one with it's one with an unpronounceable name.
Right. But in all seriousness, the Prime Minister said, let's talk this afternoon about reindustrialisation being led by military.
And that needs energy.
Yeah, and I just guarantee that's going to require more use of oil and gas,
Lloyd,
not less.
Your point on correlation and causation is usually a very good one. But in this case, it's so clear that we have destroyed our industry because of the net zero attempt that they report proudly that we've reduced industrial emissions by 63%. But that has come about, which they admit. They admitted 140 pages later, so you've got to read the whole of this beastly report to find it, that was because of a 70% reduction in our steel output. We've just offshored our emissions and destroyed our own source of wealth, because if you don't have the industry at home, the profit goes abroad.
No, we have been offshoring our industry, I'm afraid, far longer than the phrase net zero has existed. Net zero has only really existed in the lexicon or variations of it for about 15, 20 years. We have been offshoring industry. Because you can't just say tomorrow we offshored everything or yesterday we offshored everything. We've been offshoring it since, and Morris earlier on in the show was quite right, since the Thatcher deregulation.
There are two different things.
Boom.
When you offshore to make your economy more efficient, you are then using energy in other things. If we were offshoring to free up the energy... Hold on. But if we were offshoring to use the energy then freed up for AI, that would be economic growth if we had cheap energy. But actually, because our industrial energy is 4 times that of the United States, we're not going to have the right energy for AI either. So you're not just making your industry more efficient and more competitive, which was where offshoring started with Margaret Thatcher. You are deliberately closing down your industry because you're obsessed with net zero.
Maybe it's the two that have come together, but my feeling is that the bigger problem here is this obsession with the kind of Adam Smith needle approach of, I can make this more efficient and I should just focus on that. It is a security disaster. We saw under COVID how the disruption of supply chains then causes real hardship. We cannot do this kind of I only specialise in one. You have to have a baseline of everything in a country, and then you can have specialisation on top of that.
But for that, you need cheap energy, and we have policy of expensive energy. I think Drax is one of the great scandals.
We agree on that, yes.
Do we all agree on that?
We all agree on that.
Billions of pounds of subsidies and more expensive energy when it's got a coal plant a few miles away. Well, on a moment of agreement with my most intellectual panel, which makes me feel almost intellectual as they are, we must move on. And we're going to be talking about the gender wage gap, which reverses for the younger generation. So does this debunk feminism? I'll debating that shortly with a feminist. Is it now time for discrimination in favour of gentlemen? I'm sure it must be about time.
Good evening. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Touch of frost and some fog patches around tomorrow morning. For many, it'll be another fine spring day, though, with some sunshine. But there will be some wet and windy weather coming into the far north. High pressure is holding on across the south. This weather front is fizzling out, but another one is approaching. And as those isobars squeeze together, the winds will strengthen once more across northern Scotland overnight. Bit of drizzly rain at times in western Scotland, but for most it's a dry night. The clear skies in the south allowing the temperatures to tumble, getting down to -1, -2, even in towns and cities. Rural spots quite a bit lower than that. We could start at -5 or -6. Meanwhile, we'll start at +5 or +6 with the cloud cover across the north. As well as the frost, there will be a few dense fog patches across parts of the south, particularly the southeast. So bear that in mind for Tuesday morning's commutes. But once they've cleared, much of England and Wales dry, fine and sunny. Generally a bit brighter than today across the Lake District and for Northern Ireland. The thickest clouds tomorrow are going to be across northern Scotland, where we'll see light rain initially, but it is going to turn a bit heavier as we go through the day. And another thing, those winds will continue to strengthen, really getting quite blustery at times across northern Scotland. Strong gusts throughout tomorrow. A bit breezy across Northern Ireland, particularly the north coast, but generally elsewhere the wind's fairly light, so feeling very pleasant come the afternoon. After we start below freezing, we'll be up into the teens in a few spots, and with those light winds feeling pretty pleasant. Now, the fog will thicken up again as we go through Tuesday night, if anything likely to be more dense across southern counties on Wednesday morning. But again, once that's gone, plenty of fine weather. A bit more cloud again across northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some patchy rain, chiefly in the northwest. Still quite breezy here, but not as gusty as Tuesday. And again, for many, temperatures double figures and in the sunshine climbing into the teens. Bye for now.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, feminists of the world rejoice. The gender pay cap hasn't just equalised, it's swung the other way. And now young women earn £2,200 more than young men on average, according to the Centre for Social Justice. So what do we make of this? Is it the latest victory for gender equality? Is it emblematic of the wider anomaly of young men who are being hit by the decline of traditionally male-dominated industries such as manufacturing? Well, to discuss this, I'm very pleased to be joined now by the writer and broadcaster Anna May Mangan. Anna May, thank you very much for coming in. You've won. Congratulations, it's all over.
No,
Crack open the champagne.
I hate to start off with a bum note, but that's wrong, actually. Postgraduate women and graduate women are earning, on average, 14% less than their male counterparts. So we're talking about boys. Are we saying here in this argument, then, that boys are thicker than girls in general? Are they born thicker? Because how are they going through the same school process and ending up with worse results that leaves them often out of education and training?
Okay, but that's a bit unfair, because you're not saying this of the young ladies who are earning less, you're not saying they're thicker.
No, but it's the boys
is
who
it discrimination
are failing
against these boys?
Well,
or is there...
what is it? That's it. I think we need to go right back to the beginning and say, where does this begin? Because I mean, we can point at schools, we can point at employers, we can point at the government for not doing enough about apprenticeships and training. I mean, after all, not everyone wants to be a brain surgeon. I mean, there are other jobs and we need them.
Yes, I don't think I'd have been a very good brain surgeon.
But why are there so many boys not going through the system and not wanting to go through the system? Can you explain? I mean, you're a dad of 5. So
6?
No, 5 boys.
Oh, 5 boys, yeah, 5 boys.
So can you tell me how it works? I mean, where do you think it starts?
Inevitably, I think parents have a strong responsibility,
Yeah.
the biggest responsibility for their children. But I just wonder whether, whatever you do, you will end up getting different results depending on how people lead their own lives. That actually it is a pretty level playing field now. And this is an achievement over the last 40 or 50 years to make things fairer, but that has broadly succeeded. Now you see some young men doing less well than some young ladies, and some young ladies doing less well in different fields, and this will inevitably happen.
I don't think you can just say it's anecdotal. Some girls do better than some boys.
No, but we've got
what
this
about
on...
schools then? Let's go to state schools, where they're sending out boys who don't want to do homework, they don't want to work, really. They have no aspirations for anything. But interestingly, what I was reading today is what the private school boys do better. I mean, you could probably talk to that better than me. I mean, what do you think? How big a part does private schooling play in boys being successful and state school play in them not being successful?
It's also very difficult to know what the schools do and what is the individual drive of the child, because with 6 children, my 6 children all have their own levels of drive and interest.
Well, let's stick with boys. If your 5 boys were in the state school down the road, do you think they would do as well as they're doing now?
But even the 5 boys vary one to another.
Yeah, well, that's true, but would they do as well in state school, do you think?
I think it depends more on the parents, really.
How interested
are the parents? Do you see whether they're doing the homework? I said to you I'd just been to a trumpet concert for one of my son's 9-year-old. Do you slightly nag him to practice, or do you just assume he'll do it on his own? So I think the role of parents is absolutely fundamental to get children to do things.
I have another identity. I'm known as the pushy mother because I had 4 children who all went through state school, and they were all going to do well because my parents were immigrants and both worked as hard as they possibly could, but they couldn't, because it was manual labour, they couldn't get better or they couldn't rise, and they weren't particularly well educated in literacy terms. So that was not happening to my children. So I think, in a way, my success could be replicated by anybody who was as red hot on education as I was. So do we blame the parents, or the parents who have no choice about what school their children go to? Are the schools letting them down? Or is the government just not providing a path for these children to succeed after GCSE and A-level?
I certainly think you shouldn't be ashamed of being a pushy parent to try and encourage your children to be well. I think absolutely, I think that's right, and that is actually beneficial for the schools. It's often helps schools to do well if the parents are concerned. But it's these sorts of issues that determine how well people do. It's the parental involvement, the drive of the individual child, but the structure of laws about equality is more than enough to mean that people have a fair crack of the whip, whether they're male or female.
Well, not necessarily, not if they're coming up, because I always say grades are currency. Exam grades are currency, and they go and spend them. So if these boys are leaving school early or in special education units and they're not getting the grades, then they don't have the opportunities.
And this ties into the report that came out a couple of years ago that said the real effective discrimination in British society nowadays is much more by class than anything else. And it's white working class boys who seem to be falling behind the most. And how do you tackle that? Because all the focus of equalities has been on race and sex.
Well, it's about, I think that work ethic cuts across all of that. So if they can find that, but then they need to see it to be it. And when I say that, I don't mean a music producer or a top football player. I mean they need to have male role models who enjoy their work, who have aspirations, who are motivated to succeed for the worth of having a good job.
And this is a big societal problem because of family breakdown, and therefore lots of boys have almost no male role model, and increasing numbers of women teaching in schools, so they're less likely to have a male role model at school, and broken families mean they may not have a male role model.
So do those issues are they not at play in the private system then?
They're different in the private system. Certainly an all-boys school has an awful lot of male schoolmasters.
Yeah.
In a way that you don't necessarily get in mixed schools. That does create a difference. Certainly with my own sons, when I was there was one brave female teacher and no 150 male ones. And now it's very, very different, so things have changed. I'm being told I've got to finish. And I did all the talking. I'm so sorry, but thank you very much for coming on. Thank you, Anna May. Up next, it's the one and only, the great Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your programme this evening?
Well, great show, Jacob. I am wondering if Keir Starmer's ego is going to get us all killed. Is the King getting too political as well? He's waded on another big, hefty political topic. I'm not really sure that's supposed to be his job. It's been the worst day in the Channel, or yesterday was, so far this year. That appears to be flying under the radar with all of the Ukraine stuff going on. If we can't control our own borders, why on earth are we paying billions of pounds to protect somebody else's? Or £80,000 an hour is the going rate to turn wind turbines off. So we're going to be having a look at how much money we've wasted, well, on not net zero, if that makes sense, Jacob.
Well, the King can do no wrong. As Charles II said, when accused of here lies our sovereign lord the King, whose word no man relies on. He never said a foolish thing, nor ever did a wise one. He said that's because my words were my own, and my actions were the actions of my ministers. So criticise ministers, not our sovereign lord. Anyway, you all want to know about the weather, which in Somerset is going to be absolutely glorious. Beautiful. It was so good over the weekend. You'd have loved it. Much better than you'd have had in Washington if you were an American. I'm back tomorrow. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. Good night.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Touch of frost and some fog patches around tomorrow morning. For many, it'll be another fine spring day, though, with some sunshine. But there will be some wet and windy weather coming into the far north. High pressure is holding on across the south. This weather front is fizzling out, but another one is approaching. And as those isobars squeeze together, the winds will strengthen once more across northern Scotland overnight. Bit of drizzly rain at times in western Scotland, but for most it's a dry night. The clear skies in the south allowing the temperatures to tumble, getting down to -1, -2, even in towns and cities. Rural spots quite a bit lower than that. We could start at -5 or -6. Meanwhile, we'll start at +5 or +6 with the cloud cover across the north. As well as the frost, there will be a few dense fog patches across parts of the south, particularly the southeast. So bear that in mind for Tuesday morning's commutes. But once they've cleared, much of England and Wales dry, fine and sunny. Generally a bit brighter than today across the Lake District and for Northern Ireland. The thickest clouds tomorrow are going to be across northern Scotland, where we'll see light rain initially, but it is going to turn a bit heavier as we go through the day. And another thing, those winds will continue to strengthen, really getting quite blustery at times across northern Scotland. Strong gusts throughout tomorrow. A bit breezy across Northern Ireland, particularly the north coast, but generally elsewhere the wind's fairly light, so feeling very pleasant come the afternoon. After we start below freezing, we'll be up into the teens in a few spots, and with those light winds feeling pretty pleasant. Now, the fog will thicken up again as we go through Tuesday night, if anything likely to be more dense across southern counties on Wednesday morning. But again, once that's gone, plenty of fine weather. A bit more cloud again across northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some patchy rain, chiefly in the northwest. Still quite breezy here, but not as gusty as Tuesday. And again, for many, temperatures double figures and in the sunshine, climbing into the teens. Bye for now.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could be one of 2 big winners in our latest giveaway, as we have 2 prize bundles that have to be won. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. Hurry, lines close on the 7th of March. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christie's. Tonight.
And today I'm announcing a new deal which allows Ukraine to use £1.6 billion of UK export finance to buy more than 5,000 air defence missiles.
Where is all this money for Ukraine really coming from? And is the king getting far too political? Should he really be meeting Zelensky? In other news... Are we dealing with another terror attack in Europe? 2 dead as a man ploughs a car into people in West Germany. Also...
Onshore wind ban in England has been in place for more than 9 years. We've been in government 72 hours. We've lifted it.
You are paying £180,000 an hour to switch off wind farms. And...
Lots of security on here too.
Hello.
Hello.
Where are you from?
What?
Where are you from?
Media. Oh, are you guys? Okay.
Call the reception.
Call the reception.
600 illegal migrants arrived yesterday. That's about 2 hotels worth. And now Labour has extended the small boat deal with France. What are we really paying for there? Plus... It kicked off outside a mosque in Birmingham, and it's less than 24 hours, everybody. Less than